All right, welcome back. We are MDEV1004, that's Mobile APIs and Frameworks, and in the summer 2023 semester at Georgian, and it's week 4, part 1 of our broadcast and recording. And this morning, I don't have anyone here. Woohoo, right? And I miss you guys, but it is what it is. I understand some Monday mornings are challenging. So let's take a look at our schedule where we're at right now. We've just come off of a one-week break. We had a break last week because of Victoria Day. We missed that day. And today we have a very packed day in terms of the stuff that we're doing. And so let's get moving on the things we're kind of talking about today. Last time we were together, that's week 2, we talked about assignment videos. We talked about a bit of a JavaScript review that we did. We did an intro to TypeScript and an intro to Node.js and Express. With all that kind of stuff, we actually set up a little Express server locally to make sure that it worked with Node and Express. We had ICE 2, that was due kind of a couple weeks ago. And assignment 1 was released, is due next week. That's next Sunday, June 11th at midnight. That's this Sunday is June 4th, right? So this week, what do we got going on? We've got a lot of stuff happening. Converting our project to an Express API using Postman. We're going to do that a little bit today. NoSQL databases, what they are, based on some of the stuff you've already had. You should have a little bit about that. This is a review based on the fact that you may have touched upon SQL databases when you did your data management course. Maybe you did that. Maybe you also talked about it in other courses. And maybe you're taking this course for the first time and you're disconnected from everything else. So what we need to do is we need to kind of talk about these things all at once. We're also going to talk about Node.js and Express full CRUD. We'll get started on it. We'll probably finish it off next week, depending on the time frame. We'll also talk a little bit about MongoDB and what it is, and Mongoose and how to connect to it, reading data from a data source, connecting to MongoDB Atlas and Realm, because all that stuff is going to be required for you for your assignment. I guess we'll try and talk about all that stuff today. It's a lot, but let's get moving on it as we move forward. Let's talk about NoSQL databases just a little bit, as if, just as a review, because you guys should know about NoSQL databases already. And so really, at the end of the day, the landscape of databases out there was dominated by relational databases.
This on the web.
I know you sure did. And really what they use is something called a normalized data model. Normalized means, again, we remove all duplicates, all those kind of things. And it was a mature standard that they kind of used before. And then up came this object relational mapper stuff that started to crop up. And it started to manage and marshal applications as they became more complex. And then what ended up happening was, as the web grew and had all these demands, to solve different kinds of problems. One of the problems was, maybe we don't need all these relationships. Maybe we need a single table, right? How can I make a single table or a couple tables that work different ways than relational databases do, right? And again, the push to move away from a SQL database so that we can use JavaScript or something like JavaScript object notation everywhere, right? Which was kind of a push. And there's different kinds of NoSQL databases. You can have things like key value storage, column storage, object storage, but the most popular one, document storage, is the one that we're going to use. And of course, we're going to be talking about Mongo in a second. That's the one that's the most popular database out there. So again, some differences. In a common relational database, we have tables, right? And we use SQL statements to not only arrange the data, but also provide queries to get data back from the database. But document-oriented databases do things a little differently. And what they do is they store everything in a hierarchical document structure, right? And they usually use some kind of format similar to JSON or XML. So here's an example of that. I'm going to put that in here for your viewing pleasure. I'm going to skip this because, again, I'm going to assume that you know how this works in terms of a little bit of what NoSQL is. I've also provided I always provide the PDFs so that way you can always go back and take a look at this stuff and go, okay, so that's what he was talking about here in this one, right? So this is kind of talks about a post and how this works. And we have this idea of document-based database. And here's a single document, how this is going to look. I'm just going to zoom in here so you can see it. you can see that instead of having a SQL query and what that would look like, you're going to have JSON-like data, which kind of looks like this, where you have a title and a string for the title. This is kind of using JSON. And then comments would be an array, notice the square brackets, an array of strings. Those are comments, right? That's kind of very realistic. And so what this does is it gives us a different kind of structure where we can have, it's not normalized, because once we start going into an array of something for an object, we're looking at lists, and lists is not normally a normalized structure, at least for first normal form for a database. Okay, so that's how, that's a little bit different. I'm going to put that over there for the next time. There we go. So again, so we have that. We don't have, table records. We have document-oriented databases is what we're going to be talking about with NoSQL for the most part. And one problem that we always have with relational databases is the idea that the need for model changes. And this happens a lot, right? We have a model, we start thinking about all the properties of that model, or fields or columns, and then suddenly we require another one. What can we do with that? It's pretty challenging, right? So we need to do something called migration, where we migrate from one type of model to the other. And when we do a migration, depending on how interconnected those tables are, it could be quite complex. And there's always a risk of losing data or corrupting data, denormalizing the database, and a bunch of other stuff that can happen. Well, the beautiful thing about this is because NoSQL databases use a schema-less structure, right? And a lot of times, or the schema is a little bit more flexible, right? What ends up happening is, again, the migration process is much easier. It's much more straightforward than, let's say, using a relational database. So again, these are just advantages of what we're talking about here in the first few minutes. So again, what we want to think about is what problem a NoSQL database is solving. A lot of times, especially for mobile, what we want to try and do is solve the problem of complexity. We want to move away from a complex relational database and more towards a less complex single kind of table or single document, single collection database is what we're looking at a lot of times for mobile. Not always, okay? And again, one of the most popular databases is MongoDB. Let's talk about MongoDB really quickly. And again, we're thinking about this from the context of an API. If I was going to create an API now for the database, so we're creating the API here in this course compared to connecting to something that already exists, perhaps in data management, in that data management course. And this kind of hooks off with what we talk about, with what you should have talked about in your data management course last semester. So again, back in 2007, a brief history of Mongo. There was a real push to move away from relational databases. We had lots and lots of the languages of the web were all scattered. We had HTML, CSS, JavaScript. We had PHP on the back end. We had SQL, structured query language, as well as some Apache you had to know to put things up on the web. There was a lot of stuff to know. And again, as they moved closer, what they ended up doing, they said, hey, let's make it so that there's JavaScript everywhere, or JavaScript syntax as much as possible. So really now, all you need to know after 2007 was HTML, CSS, JavaScript, and JavaScript-like notation, right, for everything on the back end. Node.js was one of those components. And the other component, of course, was some kind of NoSQL database with a BSON format, which we're going to talk about in a second. So again, MongoDB was a big project. It came from the word humongous. That's where Mongo came out of. And they had, a lot of different contributors at the time. Hey, Karan, how you doing? As well as thousands of commits, to put things together. So that's what was happening there in when MongoDB was created. Okay, so back in the day. And again, I'm going through this because this is just a review of MongoDB and NoSQL databases as we're going through. Okay, so one thing that we wanted was, of course, back in the day, scalability. Right, we wanted to continue to grow, and one of the biggest challenges, again, with migration and with relational databases is the need to grow, and for it to not just have to have a kind of a vertical scaling as well as horizontal. Okay, so that's what we wanted. So I'm just going to move on through here, talk about the popularity. They had a bunch of key new features. Here's one of them. One of them was called BSON. Okay, like we talked about. So this is BSON, or kind of was a JSON-like format that we can use to query the database. That's what it was really for. Querying, just like we would, this is a weird monitor, querying the database just like we would if we were querying using SQL, structured query language. The idea was that we were able to do so with BSON. And what BSON makes up of, or is made up of, is you always get something automatic. So this is something you don't have to do. You get an underscore ID field, and that is the primary key that is unique from each document. Every document has that in MongoDB. And the ID is made up several different pieces of information. I'm not going to read that here. This is just for how it's been hashed and created for you. It's kind of random in some ways. And then what happens is you get a record or a document that might look like this. So you have the ID, and usually you have this part called object ID, the title, which is or maybe a couple of different properties. So now they're instead of fields, they're called properties. And then you'd have your title with some kind of string, and in this case your comments is an array of string. That's what it would be like. So kind of interesting. And again, it's not normalized, but it has the ability for you to nest documents internally, which is really good, I find. So you can nest one document within another, and the flexibility of the schema allows you to have different information across different documents. So there's a lot more flexibility. Now, here's something I got to talk about. Even though, document-oriented databases like MongoDB do not require a schema that's hard set. Okay, it's very flexible. A lot of times we do use a schema that is structured because it makes it easier for us as developers. One thing that they also have is this ability to do ad hoc queries. And the way ad hoc queries look like, normally with a SQL statement, it might look like this. So select all objects, that's what star means, from the posts table where the title is like whatever that you're trying to match, a pattern that you're trying to match. To do something similar in MongoDB, you would say something like DB, hey database, I want to look at the posts collection, and I want you to find all objects, that's the curly braces, all objects that have a pattern, a title that includes a pattern that has Mongo inside of it. So we're going to say, look for that word Mongo, and we're going to try and find all titles, all documents with a title that matches that pattern. Ooh, right? Again, very interesting the way it's done, and if you understand how functions work in JavaScript, then you can see that this is very natural for a developer, as opposed to using some kind of a different way, a very wordy way of communicating with the database, which is what SQL is. So that's the advantage of it. So MongoDB query language, it's much easier to use. One thing also it does is it uses indexing, and again, these are unique data structures, and the query is sent to the database. It scans through the entire collection of documents to find those that match the query statement. And this way, the database engine processes a large amount of unnecessary data, resulting in poor performance if we was to do that. But indexing actually happens a little better when it comes to MongoDB, because again, we use a predefined index which maps document fields, and we can tell it tells the engine which documents are compatible with the query statement, which is kind of interesting. So it does a little bit of work for you in the background automatically, so you don't have to work as hard. So here's an example of, I have a blog post here, first blog post, and we have a comments count of 12, and I want to find kind of posts that have more than 10 comments, right? So then we would make a query like this: DB, hey DB, I want to look at the posts collection, and I want to find something that has a post that has comments count, the comments count property. First, does it exist? And then with a value that's greater than, that's what GT means, greater than 10. As long as we have greater than 10, it'll return a collection back of all the posts that match that query. Very simple, very straightforward. And again, it matches our new structure, which is a very JSON-like query, which is kind of neat. Okay, so that's how it works. And so that was chugging away really, really well. And back in the day, we had, at the beginning of 2015, they kept on coming with different releases. And the first major release, I would say, that really made a huge impact, that we started really adopting Mongo, to me, was around 2015, which was MongoDB 3.0. Okay. After that, they've come and incrementally improved Mongo. And as of May 2023, that's this month, 2023, the current version is 6.06. Now, a couple things. We can install Mongo locally, and I invite you to do that right now, right? So if you're watching this video, you can pause the video, right, and go to your Mac OS install instructions, because normally, I know most of you have a Mac OS system. You could also do it with Windows. It doesn't really matter to me, because this is kind of testing what we're going to do. I'm going to teleport here into my Mac. Let's do that. So let's do that into here. So we're going to remote desktop into my Mac. Hopefully it's still open. Yes, there it is. And what I want to do here...
Sorry, I'm still not sure about that.
I know, you're not sure. What I want to do here when we get into my Mac for a second, here we go, is I'm just going to do a couple things here to show you that this has been installed. Okay, so typically what we do with Mac, for those people who are interested, and I recommend doing this because, of course, it's not going to work. Let's just do that again. So typically what I do with my Mac is, there we go. And let's try that again one more time. Nope. Let's see if we can do that. Is what we want to try and do here at the bottom, if you look at the Mac screen itself, is you can see that I'm going to be using something called Homebrew. Homebrew is kind of the de facto standard and how to install anything to do, kind of with some of the things that you don't need sudo for. So if I was going to install things like, as an example, Node.js, I talked about using NVM. NVM you can install with Homebrew, which is something that you do for the Mac. Here, what I've got is I'm using my Mac, and I've got MongoDB. So if I was to do something like brew, this is using Homebrew to install. And if I go Homebrew, so brew, and if I say list services, you can see that if there's any services that are being listed, they'll show up here. And you can see that no formula with the name services. Actually, it should be something like brew services list. That'll be okay. There we go, brew services list. You can see that nothing is running, but I do have installed a couple of them. One is HTTP, so if I wanted to run a web server, I could. I also have PHP if I wanted to run a PHP server, and then I have this MongoDB community. Okay, that's what I have. So if we look at the installation requirements and for MongoDB community, and let's take a look at that really quickly here. So I'm going to go into here. So if I say, actually I'd kind of pull it from this little link here. Here's the MongoDB install instructions for Mac OS. So again, we install stuff. We have to make sure that Xcode has all of its command line tools. That's important to do. And then we did we installed Homebrew, which is right, kind of how to do the Homebrew installation instructions themselves are right here. If you don't have Homebrew on your system, again, I highly recommend it for Mac users. And then what you need to do is, once you've done that, you issue this command, brew tap MongoDB brew, and then you do a brew update, which basically updates the package manager. That's what it does, because Homebrew is a package manager that enhances Mac OS and Linux systems, which is, I recommend it. And then what you do is you do this brew install MongoDB community. Now to make it work, a couple things to note is where all the key files are listed. And way down in here, you can see that you can run Homebrew services and start MongoDB. Now what really worked for me, this didn't work for me, for a number of reasons. What really worked for me was I want to have my local database path, right, as something else. And so what I've done here, if you take a look, is MongoDB requires a data directory and a DB directory inside the data directory. What I've done here in my local user directory, which is in my case Thomas, is if I do a ls-al, you can see that I have a lot of folders here, but I do have a data directory, and I made the data directory fully public. So that's read, write, and execute. That's what I've done first. So I got full permissions on that data directory. So that's my first recommending. It's owned by root, and if I go into that, if I go cd space data, you can see that all I have there is a DB folder. Okay, that's inside that directory. If I go into the DB folder, this is where Mongo is situated on my machine, right? So I know this works for me, and this is what's happened on my Mac. So then what I would do is do something like, hey, what I want to do is, let's just skim out of here, back into my home directory. This is my home directory. And I would do something like, hey, I want to run Mongo. Now, in order for me to run Mongo, I need to use sudo. So I'm going to say sudo, or sudo, some people say, mongo d, so mongod, that's how you can look at it, and then -- db path, and then equals to, and then you want to put the db path here, like the database path for what this is. I know it's inside of my data db folder, so it would be something like this, /data/db, right? That's where it is, okay? And if I did this right, and I'm going to look and see if this is right in a second, because this is how I have to run it, then it should run properly. It's going to ask me for my password because I'm using a sudo command. And if I did everything right, it's going to run the database portion in a terminal that looks like this. Okay, so this is kind of not using the service. I'm using a terminal for this. Okay, next. So once I have this in, when we look at MongoDB's guide for everything, there used to be an older client called Mongo, right? We just use Mongo. Nowadays, the client is called Mongosh, and it's installed with MongoDB Community Edition. So I'm going to launch another window here just to show you this. So here's my kind of a new window. There it is. And then in this other window, and again, you can do this all within Visual Studio Code if you want to as well. But in this other window, what I want to do is launch Mongosh. And you can see that Mongosh looks like this. It's going to connect. This is a client that connects to my database. This is the database service running, and this is the client that I have right here. Okay, so this is how this works. And then what you want to do, if I do a CLS clears the screen. And then what I want to do with Mongosh is, do some database commands. The first command you should remember if you've done MongoDB before is show DBS, which means, hey, let's show our database that we have. Now, I've gone ahead and done a couple things. I've installed the movies database, and let me talk about how to do that in a second. So here's the movies database. And one of the things that you have to do for your assignment number 1 is create a movies database with your top 20 movies. Now, I've kind of done that, and I'll talk about how I did it, and I've also shared an example of it with you so you see how this is done. So here I've got a movies database, and again, if I was going to do a, kind of the command to use this, let me just full screen this one. I don't care if I have the bottom or not. Here's just so you can see a slightly larger view. Then I would do something like this. I would say db dot, first of all, I can say use movies. So I use that database. I switched to the movies database now. That's how you do it with Mongo, right? And then you can do something like db dot, let's also do a show collections. I'll be okay. So show collections actually does all the collections. I have a movies database, and the movies database has a movies collection. I mean, that's just what I did. You can call it whatever you like. Maybe I could have called this top 10 movies or top 20 movies or something like that. It doesn't matter. But right now, I would say, hey DB, hey database, I want you to look into the movies collection. Even though the database is called movies, I'm actually looking at the movies collection. And then I want to do a find. I want to find all the movies. And if you just don't put anything in there like this, this is the command that I can issue. And then I can make it pretty. Making it pretty actually pipes it into another function. And this makes it look like pretty format, a nicer format than just the way it would normally appear. If I press enter here, then it's going to return all the databases, all the documents in my database. And you can see here that I have several. And I'm going to talk about how I got this in a second. But this is the way you would do your first query. And this is a great test of how this would work. Okay, so let's clear the screen for that one. And let's quit. And I'll go back and talk about how I did all that stuff. And I'll keep this little service running because we're going to come back to it in a second. Back to the installation. Let's go back to that installation part. So we talked about how we need to do that installation, which is this. This is your community installation here. So again, what I found was running brew services start didn't work for me. It didn't work. And by the way, I didn't install community 6. I just installed community. That did it for me. I found instead that I had to run mongod. That's how I did it. And I ran it kind of manually as a background process. But instead of manually running it, what I did was you have to configure to run Mongo manually. You must have a data DB, folder. Data is the top folder, DB is the underlying folder, and that's how you have that, okay? So that's how you kind of do it. And like what I showed you earlier, that is a way of managing how that works. I also wanted to migrate some data. And what I've done here for this week is I've given you some example data. If you look up on Blackboard, if you go to weekly content, and if you go to week 4, you'll have your PowerPoint slides as normal, plus this little video that I'm making right now, and you have several little files. Okay, I've given you an Excel file, right? I've given you a CSV file that's made from that Excel file, and I've also given you a movies.json file that I created that was based out of the database data CSV and the database data XLS. Now, a couple of warnings and things for you guys. One, please do not use my database. My database is just an example of movies that I like. Yours should have 20 movies. This only includes 10. This does not include the poster link. It does not include that field. That's for you to do. I didn't include that on purpose, just to make sure that you have something to do as well. But I wanted to show you this database and what this possibly could look like, and I've got it here right now. Let's take a look at our database data XLS and see what this looks like. Now, this is something that I also shared with my data management course, and if you were in the data management course with me, you probably have seen this. So I created a very simple Excel file with all of the fields that I talked about before that were required for your assignment, except for the poster link. You can see here I also have MPA rating and the critics rating. That's what I kind of did for you guys. But we know this is a problem. And this is a problem. If I was going to make a relational database with this, the problem is, look, I have action, adventure, and fantasy, right, in one genre kind of column, and that is not normalized. Normalization requires only one piece of data, one value. I have a list of values here, and that doesn't really work great for normalized tables, right? However, it really works okay and for JSON data. So what you'd want to do is you can't bring an Excel spreadsheet into the MongoDB database directly. You can't do that. What you need to do is you need to convert it to a CSV, and then from the CSV, convert it to a JSON file. So I've already done that work for you, but let's explain how this works. So I would say something like file, and then I would do something like export, or you can do a save, save a copy, or save. But let's do an export. Export says I want to change the file type, and I want to change the file type to a CSV. So you can choose a comma separated or comma delimited CSV file. This is the one you would do, and then you would save as, and it would pull up, kind of the location of where you want to save this as a CSV file. So that's the first step. Save it as a CSV, okay? And this is going to create a header row. That's what it's going to do. And that header row is going to have all the fields that you need, for your database. That's number one, okay? The second thing you want to do after you have the CSV is go to a site like, there's many of them out there. I've given you a link for CSV to JSON. Okay, let's go there. So CSV to JSON. And here you can see that you can dump your CSV file directly in here. Let's do that. So I'm going to say, like, let's suppose that I have my CSV file. Did I actually have it here? Maybe I do not. Let's just delete this one. I want to make that. Let's make the CSV file then, finally. So let's go back here. Let's do it. So I'm going to say File, and I'm going to say, again, Export, change type, make it a CSV, and we'll just do that, export now. So Save As. And when we do that, it's going to go into the right location, database.csv, save. And when this does it takes a second, because what it's going to do is going to parse your data, and it's going to change it into comma-separated values. That's what CSV stands for. And it's saving it here in our folder structure. Let's take a look and see if it did that finally. Did it? Or is it still doing it? It's been weird today. Weird. All right, let's try that again. Did it finish? It says data loss, some features, blah, 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 blah. Don't show again. Okay, let's try that again. So File, Export, change type, CSV. Did it go in the wrong spot, maybe? Save As. Let's go to Courses. Yeah, it went to the wrong place. Georgian, POK. It's morning. It's Monday morning for me too. And I want to go Lessons, and then let's do that there and save, and that should do it. There it is. Okay, so here's the CSV file. So you take the CSV file now that you've exported it, and you're going to go into here, some kind of site like that, lots of sites. And what you can do is take the data.csv file and drag it in here. And what it does is it converts it to a format that is somewhat usable. And I say somewhat for a lot of reasons, because if I go down here and convert, before we download, we can see that there's some issues. And you may not know what the issues are, but I could point them out to you. I would ask if someone was here, I would say, hey, so what do you think the issues are? And the issues are, if you look at directors, writers, actors, and genres, directors, writers, and actors, right? If I was going to zoom in here so you can see that those fields or those properties, right, are lists, right? These are lists, but it's not really represented as a list here. What it's represented as is a string. That's all it is, one string. And it shouldn't be that way. This should be an array of strings. So what you need to do is a little bit of massaging before you bring it into MongoDB. And I've done an example of that massaging for you. Now there are other, I'll put it out there to you as well. There are other converters that I've seen that do this kind of thing somewhat more successfully than others. I've just chosen one here that's the most common one that I've found that you're probably going to find. And if I was going to look at the data for a second, if I was going to export it, so here's my movies.json. What I've actually done, I'm just going to double click here and bring up Visual Studio Code, right? Just to show you this on the PC side for a second. You can see that what I would have is something that looks like this. This is incorrect. And the reason why this is no good, absolutely not, is because first of all we have \n. \n is new line characters. We don't need that. And we want to encapsulate all of these things in as an array. So here's the way you would do it quickly. If I wanted to encapsulate all of this thing as an array, you just kind of highlight this whole area, and then you press the left bracket, and all of a sudden it kind of surrounds everything in left brackets. Now what you need to do, just a little bit of a slog, is you need to go through here and add your question marks, okay? Or quotation marks, I mean. And if you did that, you would be left with something that looks like this. Okay, so this is what it would be looking like. Fantasy. Wow, I can't even spell. All right, so this is kind of what it would look like. And this is what you'd have to do for the entire thing. Now, I've gone ahead, let's just don't save that. I've gone ahead and I've done it all like this for you for the first round. So if you go up here to your movies.json under the example movie databases, and if I do a save link as, there it is. And if I go to our courses, Georgian, MDEV1004, inside the lessons folder, let me replace this one with the one that I've got on Blackboard for you. And if I was to show you this one, you're going to see that if I open it up, what it's going to look like. It should be different than what we had before. Here it is. Here's all that stuff that I did one by one. I went through and I converted the Excel spreadsheet data into something that's usable from here. Now this is why it's really, really good. Here's why I wanted to help you with this. One, I have some extra information here that I put in. Movie ID, title, studio, and blah, 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 right? I've got all that. And you can see that I have a pattern for you that you literally can copy paste, just replace the data with your own stuff, and you're good to go. It's going to help you with your assignment number 1, which is what I really wanted to do. But this is what it would look like, and this is a proper comma separated, kind of JSON file with each of these items, each of these documents. That's what these are, and each document has maybe a field like genre that is an array. That's the type, an array of strings, which is what genre is. Instead of one genre, you have an array of them, and you can have a list of genre that you can pull down from this stuff as well. Now, the really interesting part is how would you display this stuff in a mobile device? That we're going to get to that. But the first part is, do you display it as a list? Do you display it as a pull down? Do you display it, kind of horizontally? What do? You have a lot of options is the answer, right? The reason why you want to make it a list is because then I can search the list, because that's what it is. It's a collection of strings. I can do stuff with it. If it's just one big string, I can also do stuff with it with some limitations. Here, we've already got this all prepared for you. And then remember what it looked like on the Mac side, right? I'm going to talk about my importing in a second. If you look at the Mac side of the house, right, and if I look back to do that, if I went and said something like Mongosh, hey Mongosh, connect it to my database, and then do the clear screen, and then do something like, hey, let's use movies, and then do a db.movies.find just by itself. Let's just do a find. Again, it kind of makes it pretty format nowadays anyway. That's what Mongosh does without the pretty. And you can see that's exactly what I've done. So look here, genre is an array of strings. That's what it is. But meanwhile, movie ID is an integer, okay? So that's interesting that you can do that. So this is all the stuff. You've got your critics rating, which is a float or a floating point number. And you've got a year, which could be an integer, or it could be year 1982, or whatever it's going to be. All right, so I've given you some examples, and notice it automatically generated the underscore ID, which is an internal ID, a primary key for this thing, which realistically means we don't need a movie ID. I'm using the movie ID there for your own, so which one is it? Number 10, number 1, that's what it's for from an organizational perspective, but really at the end of the day, it's up to you. I put it in there because I said that was required, and that's why I kind of created it for you. Okay, so there you go. So there's movies. Notice that the bottom, the reason why it said test at the beginning, people asked this question as well when I did this last time. How come it said test at the bottom? Because by default, it's the test database that it goes into, right? And here I'm using movies, the movies database, and what it does now is it kind of moves into the movies database by default, and that's why it's showing that right here. Okay, let's quit. Quit, again, is a quit function, which we quit out of Mongosh. So that's how you would see it, but how do you migrate into it? Okay, so again, the migration protocol, if I was going to migrate from one to the other, it's basically what I want to do is it's Mongo import. It's the Mongo import command, okay? So if I was to look at that, if I go to Mongo import, right? And if I was to look at that, Mongo import comes from MongoDB database tools. And nowadays, if you install it on the Mac, it includes MongoDB's database tools. That's what it includes. Here locally on my PC, if I was to run it, let me show you this. And if I was to type in something like Mongo version, right, you can see that my version is 5.06. I've left it like this on purpose because I want to update today. How do I do that? One other thing that on my PC, to show you on the PC side, you can see that here on this PC, if I look at my documents, I have a data DB folder. If you don't have a data DB folder, you cannot run MongoDB. You can't do it. Okay, it won't allow you to do it. Okay, that's data DB. Excellent. Yeah, good. Let's do the installation part here again, as if I've never installed it here on my PC. So I'm just going to do it to run it. One thing is we need to close down all of your terminals or command prompts whenever I do this. I'm going to go to that installation step. You can see that I've clicked onto it, and I'm just going to kind of save this in downloads. Let's save it. Here it is. And let's wait for this thing to download. It's 482 megs. It's not that big, but it's still not that small. And I'm talking about this installation. You might say, well, why are we installing this locally? Because we're going to use MongoDB Atlas, and MongoDB Atlas is a kind of a cloud-based version of MongoDB. You're right? So that is something that we want to be able to do. But we also want to be able to test locally, because sometimes we can do some commands locally. We don't have anything to do with our service online. Think about it as a staging area where I'm kind of testing everything locally. I can monkey with the models locally and then do my imports remotely. Okay, so here we are. So I'm going to install MongoDB. Let's try this out. I'm not running MongoDB as a service. That's one thing I will not do. And the reason why I don't want to run it as a service, because again, it kind of collides sometimes with other things that I'm running, because it runs on port 27017. That's typically the port that MongoDB uses, and I don't want to clutter that port. So I'm going to click next here. This is the installation for PC. Okay, and when I say accept, click next, and it says, what do I want to do? I want to make it complete. I do not want to install MongoDB as a service. I'm going to uncheck this option if you're going to install it as here on a PC. I'm going to click next, and then it's going to ask me, do you want to include Compass? I don't use Compass. Compass is a user interface that kind of looks at MongoDB. I like to look at it from a command line perspective, so I do not install Compass. Again, it clutters our system a lot of times, and I can do a lot of the commands right on the actual Atlas itself when I use Atlas. Click next. Then it's going to say, and do you want to install it? Yes, I do. Let's click install. It might ask you for permissions, right? Because it needs a lot of times admin access. Let's see if this actually is going to work for me as it downloads MongoDB. And by the way, I'm at Georgian. That's another possibility. It may not, some of the installation may kind of be weird when you're installing it at school. There it is, finally. I'm getting a kind of a message. Do you want to install this? Are you sure? Yes. Sometimes downloading stuff from different places, is especially at school, is kind of weird. But it looks like it's going to work for me. Okay. There we go. And let's click finish. So once we've done that, we've installed MongoDB. Wonderful. Let's test it now. Let's see if it works. So one thing is to install it. The next thing is actually testing. And let's do a Mongo -- version. And let's see if we have it. Notice it says 5.06 again. Well, this is the problem, right? And why this didn't work is because of my environment variables. Let's go to environment variables here. So again, if I was to look at advanced settings, so this is advanced system settings, inside of Windows 10 or Windows 11, if I click on environment variables here, one thing that you're going to see here is there's a path up here. This is the local path for Tom. That's for me. And then there's stuff down here, my path for every user. What I want to look at is the path itself. So if I open up this up here, what we want is a list of where MongoDB was installed. So that's something that you have to look at here. So you see that there's no MongoDB mentioned here, except for this. C program files MongoDB server 5.0 bin. Well, we can run multiple versions of MongoDB on our system. And so here, in my case, if I look at what this looks like, so program files, right? And if I look at MongoDB, here's server, notice that there's 6, there's 5, and there's 4.2. I got a bunch of them, right? I want 6. This is the one I want, right? So what I need to do is go into my path here, and if you have a previous version of MongoDB like I do, and then change the number here from 5 to 6, right? And that should do it. It has to be the exact path of where MongoDB lives on your system, right? If you don't have this, or if you're having problems running the command or the command prompt, you need to use an environment variable to set this up. And this is where you would go, okay? So 6 is what I would put in there, and then press OK. And then press OK. Make sure that your command prompt is closed. Let's close this off. We don't need that anymore. Make sure that if your command prompt was open, you reopen it. So restart it, and then try it again. Mongo -- version. And now we should see the right version, but we still see that it's not. Here's MongoDB, and it's looking at 5.06. And so, why is this happening? So, I mean, it's going to run, by the way. Even if I ran Mongo the old way, it's okay, but I want to get the new version. How do I migrate? Okay, so cool. Let's go back and do advanced system settings again. Remember, there's two There's two of these environment variables. One of them is here in path, and I've already changed it to 6. There's 6 right here. Okay, and the other one a lot of times is in here. I have 2 of them. There's path, right? By the way, take a look at any other Mongo references anywhere in your path. If you see anything like that, you need to change them. So here's my other path. Let's take a look and see if I have MongoDB somewhere in here as well. So again, I'm going to scoot through here and see if I can make it out. And if I do, then I need to change it up. So here, look, there's another one, MongoDB. And you can see that MongoDB server is at 5, and I want to change this again to 6. We need to change it everywhere. Otherwise, it's just not going to work the way we want. Okay, so that's why the command works. I'm just making sure there's nowhere else. Press OK. I know there's a lot here. And one thing I have to caution you guys, if you're working this on your PC from home, this is why it's complex to do it locally, and it's easier to do it on MongoDB Atlas, is because you need to make some configuration changes to your system. People are nervous about this stuff, and they're nervous because if you mess up your advanced system settings and your environment variables, you're done. Some of the things won't work anymore, and you have to do a lot of stuff. You have to reinstall some stuff. So it could be a little bit of danger, but look what I did. I only changed one little thing. For you, if you don't have that listing there for your path, you need to go to advanced system settings and actually put in your path. Again, where is that path? If you were going to put it in, you can see that for me, it's under my PC, C:, and then I need to go into program files, and then program files, and I look for MongoDB. There it is, server, and then 6. Okay, so that's where it's living. And you can see that I just did that today at 5:29. Sorry, that's May 29th at 8:42 in the morning. That's when I did it a few minutes ago, 5 minutes ago. And so I know this is the one. I could also delete these 2 manually. I'm not going to do that here. Why? Sometimes I need to go back to an earlier version of a database. These are earlier versions I'm giving you examples of, and that's how they would work. Wonderful. Okay, so now let's make sure it works. So again, Mongo -- version. Does it work still? And it says, let me just tell this again, Mongo -- version. And it says Mongo is not even recognized anymore, okay? This is good, because what we've actually done for this to actually work is it's going into 6, and it's going into bin, and you can see that there is no Mongo anymore. It's Mongosh, okay, that's what it is. And so it's Mongosh -- version, and Mongod is the one we want to use. Okay, this is good. This is actually a good thing. So if I go to Mongod -- version, right, then you can see that now I'm at 606. Yes, this is a good thing. Now to run Mongo here locally on my PC, it's the same process. I would just run Mongod. Now I have to have admin privileges sometimes. Let's see if this works. If I run locally, you can see that this runs, right? And now I have a little command prompt here, and it's using port 27017. I'm just going to run another terminal window. This is the same process on the PC that I just showed you on the Mac. And then here you would run Mongosh, and to see if it connects, right? And you can see here that it does indeed connect, right? And what I can do is clear the screen, CLS. And now if I go to show DBS, you can see that there is no movies database. I want to do that funky, Mongo import statement that I talked about before, okay? And I want to import that file right here. How do I do that? First, let's quit. And let's also talk about, do I have Mongo import? Can I do that? Can I do a Mongo import? And you can see that there is no Mongo import available on the PC. Reason for this is because MongoDB tools needs to be imported as well, or attached. Let's go back to that install, kind of products section. All right. So again, this is for the Mac. Mac has it built in, but PC unfortunately does not. So let's go to install in Windows. And Here's MongoDB shell, Mongosh, that's what it was. Here's the platform support. Install MongoDB, Community Edition. We did that in the download center, right? We ran the installer, and that's great. Follow the command instructions, and so on. And here they're talking about running it as a service, right? Install MongoDB, and so on. Install Mongosh. You can do that separately, right? And then you can run the service. And what I want to do is, of course, install MongoDB tools for Windows. So let's scroll down here and let's see if it actually exists. So here's the data directory they talk about, connecting to MongoDB, localhost, and and the binaries. So there's the community editions, right? And what we want to do is MongoDB tools, right? Let's see how that is. So if I want to install MongoDB tools for Windows, right? Does it exist? Right, so installing database tools on Windows, here it is, and then it requires at least a certain level, MongoDB 6 and Premium, and it says here's the installation, and we want to do this MongoDB download center. Let's go back to the download center here, and the download center it says here's the shell, MongoDB shell, which is what we've already done. And I don't want to install MongoDB shell. There's the Compass download. If you haven't installed that, you can do that separately. Here's the Atlas CLI. We don't want to use that. Kubernetes, the CLI for Cloud Manager, and there's many other ones. And if you scroll down here, we want database tools. This is the one. So database, MongoDB database tools. It says download. Let's do that together. So download. Here it is. Now it's a zip archive. And once we've done that, we want to. I'm going to use extract to that folder. I'm using 7-zip, right? And we're going to get that folder. So the folder looks like this. So there's a bin folder, and inside the bin folder you have all this extra stuff, beason dump and blah blah blah. Notice that there's only executables here, which is a great little thing. That means that I could put these tools, right, in the same folder as where we had our MongoDB. Now, it doesn't tell you this, okay? It doesn't tell you to do that realistically anywhere. However, you could do this, no problem. Why? Because they're just executables. They're kind of self-contained executable files. We don't care about these licenses and all that kind of stuff. So let's go into that bin folder, and then I'm going to kind of pull up another File Explorer window just one more time. And then in here, in the and I know I'm going extensively on this, but just in case you wanted to run this locally and have the same experience as you do on the Mac, this is why I'm going to do this for you. And so here's PC. I have installed it under Program Files, MongoDB. Remember last time we just were there, MongoDB, and then under Server 6 bin, I have these tools. Well, I want to grab all these tools too. Let's copy paste. Let's see what happens. So if I take all these, copy. Go in here and paste, right? It says, "Are you sure?" Because this is a repository, a protected folder. Then I'm going to say yes, continue, and let's do this for all of them, right? And it's going to submit, and it's going to kind of copy everything into there. Now that I've done that, if everything went well, if I go back to my terminal, let's close off this terminal here, and open up another one. Let's see if I can do this. My terminal command. Then let's try Mongo import, right? And you can see now Mongo import is working. It didn't work before. I downloaded the tools and put them in the same folder, and now they're okay. But this is the way it works. I'm going to say Mongo import. I need to mention what the the database is going to go into. What's the collections that I'm going to create? I need to create the database, create the collections, and I need to point it with the what path it's going to be on. Right, so where are my files? That's what I'm going to do as well. And then I also got to tell it that it's going to kind of interpret everything as an array of documents. And where do I find all this information? Well, if I go to Mongo import, here's the database for MongoDB. It's under database tools, and it really tells you this stuff. So you can Mongo export and Mongo import. And we're going to need to do this, by the way, when we take our local database and push it up to MongoDB Atlas in a second, okay? There's Mongo import. Okay, so Mongo import, let's scroll down here. it gives us some options. So it says, hey, here's Mongo import, here's the options, here's the connection string if we have one, and here's the file. Okay, this is the file that we're going to import from. Okay, and Mongo export, we can also do a Mongo export and import. We have both capabilities in order for us to do these things. So I'm going to scroll down here so we can see other options. So there's my other options: version, the config, if we have a config file name or whatever, a URI if we want to use a connection string, and so on, and a host and a port and an SSL if we're going to use SSL or not. And if we scroll down to all the different options for Mongo import, you can see that there's quite a few, but I want to mention a couple things. So here's the collection. So here's the collection. You have to name the collection. You have to name the database. Collection equals, database equals. We also need, you can also specify fields. So if you want fields to have a specific field, and the field name, you can specify field names if you wanted to do that. You can ignore blanks. That's important to do as well. You can specify the type. In our case, it's going to be JSON, right? Or the file. Here's the file name, and use array indexed fields if you really want to do that. Okay, you want to kind of create a use array index fields, and the mode if you want to insert, upsert, merge, or delete. We're going to talk about those different kinds of things. And here is something that I like to use, which is -- JSON array at the end. Okay, so that's one thing that you can see here as well. Okay, let's try this out and see how this process works. So first, where we are right now is not where we want to be. We want to be in the folder that we have the CSV file. This is the way to do it. It's an easier way to do it. You don't have to do it this way, but I prefer it this way. So I'm going to go into my documents, courses, wherever my course is, I'll be okay. And I'm going to go into Georgian and back into here, and I have my stuff here in my lessons. So there's my movies.json that I want to import, right? And I want to do a CD space and drag and drop my movies.json here, which is going to teleport me right into the folder. Should get me right into that folder. Let's try that. What did I do wrong? Oh, it's not a folder. I actually did the wrong thing. CD space and the folder, which is this one. And then press enter. And that's going to take me into the folder. And then if I do a dir, you can see I have all that stuff. This is the perfect location to make it nice and easy to do the import. Next, the import statement itself. Let's make this a little wider so you can see this here in its glory. I'll make this a little wider for you. And what you would do is you do the following things. You say Mongo import. Okay, the name of the database, so --db equals to movies, right? And then --collection is equal to movies. --file is equal to /, again, in our case, it's movies.json. And then -- we want to have that, like it says in here, we want to use that JSON array switch. So JSON array. And this is important because if we don't do this, then it won't import properly. And it could provide errors. We'll figure the errors out in a second. If I press enter, then it might say something like, well, it doesn't know what files are. Maybe we want file name because I made a mistake. It's never S. So I want to go back up to, where we had header line and we have file instead of files. Okay, so that's my problem. Let's go back to this. And we can just use the up arrow to come back with that same command and just change this from files to file. And then press enter and see what happens. And it's perfect. It says connected to MongoDB localhost. So first of all, you have to have your MongoDB server running in order for you to do this command. And then 10 documents imported successfully, 0 documents failed to import. Now we're cooking. Now we can go back and do that command. So we'll clear the screen and we'll go mongosh. And then in our mongosh command, we can do something like, let's do a show DBS. And hey, look at that. We have our movies collection. Maybe it didn't work properly. Maybe it did. Let's take a look. So how do we check that? We're going to do a use movies. Right, so now we're switched to the movies collection. And we're going to do let's do a show collections to see if it worked. There's movies, the movies collection. And what we're going to do is we're going to say db.movies right? DEV.movies.find. And if we did everything properly and press enter, then you're going to see that, sure enough, it has everything in there, and it put everything in its proper format. Guys, this is going to take you a long way to getting your assignment 1 done, because I used an Excel spreadsheet, which is way easier when it comes to formatting your data and getting your data from those sources that I mentioned in your assignment 1. So that's way, way easier than what we've done in the past. Number 1. Okay, that's the first thing. Second thing, once we've got our data in here, we've got our, I've got some data, right? And this is an example I can always drop the whole entire table as well and do this again, the same import, right? But I can add stuff to my Excel spreadsheet, and I can go through and clean it like I did before, export it, convert it to CSV and stuff. There's only 20 records or 20 documents, so it's not a whole lot of work to do here, right? But the good thing is you can get your data. The first part, what I'm paying you for assignment 1, if you want to call this paying, right? I'm paying you for getting the data onto MongoDB Atlas and making sure we have some way of polling that data. All right, so that is the first step, and I want to stop here. We're sitting at 9 o'clock. I've spoken for about an hour. I'm going to take a short break, 5 minutes or so, and then start the next video. This is the first part, and the first part was all around, hey, we've got MongoDB, how to install stuff. If I was going to install it locally on Mac and PC, how do I do it? And how do I import my data to make my life easier, as opposed to importing it by hand, which is not what we want. By the way, for in-class exercise 3, and I mean this week's in-class exercise, I want you to have my data that I've given you imported into your local database, because this is the one part that I want you to show for in-class exercise 3. Okay, I just showed you this, so hopefully you know how to do it. Now, people may encounter some issues, and we're going to talk about these issues later on, and if you were here, I can answer some questions interactively, but that's okay. You may encounter issues, but remember, the ultimate goal is putting all our data online using an API as opposed to local. But first, we're going to work locally, okay? Again, let's take 5 minutes. We're sitting at 9:02. I'll stop recording this session, and we'll come back in 5 minutes at 9:07, approximately. Let's stop recording now.